How's it going, everybody? We are back. Today's video going to be recapping Steelers OTAs, which concluded on Thursday. In order to do that, I've got a very special guest making his debut on the channel, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Chris Carter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Locked On Steelers podcast. I know that you guys are very familiar with Chris's work. I always enjoy chopping it up, talking ball with him. But Chris, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule, man. How are you doing on this wonderful morning?
I am doing great, Derek. I'm glad to be here. It's excited to always talk ball with you. I'm a great ball knower that you are, and certainly it has been a very interesting 2 weeks of OTAs. Particularly because we spent 6 days of practices asking, saying, "Do you guys know where Aaron Rodgers is? You guys know what's going on with Aaron Rodgers?" And then all of a sudden he shows up at the end of OTAs. And now we get minicamp, and minicamp proposes to be one of the most wild Tuesdays because while a lot of the TV stations in town were planning to be at the U.S. Open and covering all like Scotty Scheffler and all those guys coming into town, now you're going to be there. Not only will Aaron Rodgers be there, we fully expect DK Metcalf to be there, TJ Watt to be there with his whole contract negotiation, and we'll get to talk to the coaches about all these things. It's going to be a crazy Tuesday and Wednesday, really, when minicamp opens this week.
Yeah, I will say that it is going to be surreal because you've got like two really big kind of star names in Rodgers and Metcalf, like putting on the helmet for the first time, not the jersey, but at least the helmet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, the TJ thing, we'll see how much longer that drags on into the offseason. But I think I speak for everybody, and I'm sure you feel the same way, is that like I'm just glad that it's like finally official. We're not going to talk too much about Aaron Rodgers today. I know that everybody and their mom is asking you your opinion on Aaron Rodgers. I've already jumped on this channel and given my opinion on Aaron Rodgers. So, but we do have a lot of other stuff that I really want to talk about as it relates to the team itself. And I kind of want to just get started with like, what was your number one takeaway from those 6 or so OTA practices? Could be a specific player, a coach, a unit, just any observation that you'd like to kind of share with the people.
I'd like to point to one group in particular that has a new position coach, and I think he could end up making the biggest difference as far as one of the coaching additions, and that's Gerald Alexander in the defensive backs.
Okay.
I thought Grady Brown did a solid job as far as helping guys understand things and communicating things in the classroom, but one thing that you always saw at Grady Brown during practices, he was more laid back. He kind of let you do what you did, and then he'd run to correct you in his classroom. Gerald Alexander is like the polar opposite of that. Now, for those who don't know Gerald Alexander, he's the new defensive backs coach. He had been Grady Brown's assistant for 2 years in 2022 and 2023. Then he took a job as the Raiders safeties coach this past year when the Steelers let Grady Brown's contract expire as the defensive back coach. They went and got Gerald Alexander, brought him back, and now he runs the secondary. He operates in a completely different fashion. When he sees you do wrong, he points it out. And not just points it out, he is enthusiastic. He is in your face. He is on your case, and he is flying all over the place teaching. He's like, we have to get every detail right all the time. For example, I was watching like third team guys in the secondary working drills during like the early individual sessions, and what they were doing was they were working different alignments and how they line up with certain calls versus certain formations. And this one play, it was to appear to look like man coverage, but to drop into a zone. And he was yelling at one of the backups. He was like, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I don't think that's man. I don't think that's man. And so he is trying to pull out in these early May practices that no one's ever going to remember. He's trying to pull that out of them and say, we need to get this level of detail from everyone. And those are the backups. He's calling for the same detail from the starters. He's pressuring guys. Minkah Fitzpatrick, when I talked to him, he talked about how refreshing it is to have a guy like that on in the coaching staff and helping push guys. Joey Porter Jr., Corey Trice, both had said, hey, we liked him a lot when he was here. So we were very happy to get him back. I think that could be a really big thing for the Steelers this year if the fruit of this work turns into actually being a better secondary that's more connected than it was last year. Because you remember those games, Derek. As Deshaun Elliott said after the Chiefs game, guys were wide bleeping open. Like there was just miscommunications, breakdowns, whether it was Cam Sutton or someone else. If they limit those to happen a lot less frequently this year, it will go a long way to helping their defense keep those big plays contained and also creating more turnover opportunities for the secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's awesome to hear for a couple of different reasons. One, just like the point about like the man zone tells and how cornerbacks can kind of tell eyes pre-snap to kind of get quarterbacks a little bit off balance. I think that's one of the things that we've kind of been looking for from the defense, right? Like having a little bit more flexibility on the back end, not being as, I would say predictable.
Right.
Kind of cause that split second half of hesitation because that helps the pass rush kind of working the front and the back end kind of in concert. And then like what you said, obviously just that 5-game losing streak down the stretch, just a lot of miscommunications, seeing guys run wide open, a lot of players getting really frustrated obviously with the way the defense performed over the second half of last year and a lot not living up to their potential. And I think the secondary definitely shared a good bit of blame for that. And I was like, one of the interviews that I saw from you guys during the media scrum was just talking about Minka and he was
Mm-hmm.
saying that like if you don't communicate on the back end, you're not going to play. And like that's
Right.
kind of one of the things that I was talking about last year, like when all this stuff was happening, is like you got to start putting some guys on the bench. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that that's the reason why Grady Brown isn't here and he's elsewhere and Jared Alexander was brought back. But I do think that it was an indication that of all the changes they decided to make this offseason, that was one of them, right? And bringing in somebody, and it's cool to see him kind of being a little bit, maybe a little bit more vocal on guys in practice. And then one of the questions I kind of have is like how he's going to work with Joey Porter Jr., right? A really talented kid who's done a lot of really good things, but the penalties are something like how are they going to address that? You want guys to play loose, you want them to play fast and physical, but there has to be some type of discipline with your play. And that's something that I think is important with Joey kind of fine tuning those details with his hands in particular. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that all takes shape. But I think the one guy I want to ask you about just off the rip on the defensive side of the ball, not a secondary player, but defensive lineman, Derek Harmon, the team's first round pick. There's a lot of playing time, available for him really off from the jump without Larry Ogunjobi here. There's going to be, I'm expecting him to get starter reps really from day
Mm-hmm.
one. So what have you seen so far from Harmon? You've seen young defensive linemen like kind of come through the program over the years, but what stands out about Harmon, both good or bad?
I think he's been very serious about this process. I've seen him take that on very seriously. I haven't really seen much bad from it. It's tough to judge linemen on either side of the ball when it's just football in shorts.
Right.
I will say, first day of rookie camp, he shows up and it's him and YA Black, and they're hitting the sled, and Carl Dunbar's on the back of the sled, and he's just like, "All right, I want you guys to push, punch, take 2 steps, and then release." And so they did that, and like they almost knocked Carl Dunbar off the sled. And he was like, "Okay, you some strong." So
Yeah.
he was really caught off guard by their power, and I think that's going to be the thing that the Steelers are going to want out of those guys and Quale and their additions on the D line. They want these guys to be stronger up front. Your first goal is going to be to eat blockers. Do not let these guys get to the second level. Push them back. Do what you can to take on double teams. That's what's going to be a factor there. Now, again, it's tough to really tell if that's going to translate when it's just football in shorts. They're not doing pads. They're not really hitting. But I do get the sense that like Derek Harmon especially is kind of a raring to go type of person. Now, I think there's going to be things that he's going to need to refine in his game, like all rookies. I think that probably kind of like what Broderick Jones is going through right now. Broderick Jones told us he dropped about 20 pounds heading into this year's OTAs because he wanted to be more athletic. I think Derek Harmon will eventually have a transformation like that, but it also takes experimenting to figure out what works for you, right? I covered Stephon Tuitt for years, and I remember like in 2017, Stephon Tuitt came in and he put on weight because he wanted to get stronger. Then in 2018, I think he came in, he took off weight, and he was trying to figure out what's my right playing weight. Like, how do I want to come in stronger and get bigger throughout the season, or do I want to come in lighter and then get bigger throughout the season and then kind of be at my normal weight by mid-season? I think that's where Derek Harmon's eventually going to figure out his path. But right now, he looks like he's ready to be physical. He's ready to play. He's ready to fight. And I get the sense that Derek Harmon is very much a no nonsense guy. He kind of comes in and he's kind of just like, he's letting people, he's answering questions. He's not really entertaining a whole lot of stuff. I think he's just really, really focused on his day-to-day tasks to get better that the Steelers are charging him with. And he is benefiting from playing or from practicing next to Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton. Benton said, we call him Lil Bro, even though he's like 4 inches taller than me.
Mhm.
But I think that they're putting a lot into him, and he's being receptive to their mentorship, and I think that is a good sign for the future for the Steelers.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've mentioned this before, but just like Harmon, like his transformation just with his body over the years, that's one of the things that I think is really a testament to his work ethic. I mean, he got to Michigan State as a 350-pound freshman. And now you look
Mhm.
at him and like when I look at Harmon, I still see some room for improvement, maybe with his body. But like you said, like
Absolutely.
sometimes it's going to take guys a little bit of time to figure out what the best playing weight is for them. That trajectory you mentioned about the beginning of the season from camp all the way till hopefully they're going into the playoffs. And even the stuff like the sled stuff, I think is going to be super fascinating to see how he takes to that, like in training camp too. Because like Harmon was one of those guys where was primarily winning with a little bit more finesse in college and with his hands. But I think if he can add that power element, because you see some flashes with it, it's just he kind of has a little bit of a bad habit of like prematurely extending his arms all the way out, and instead of kind
Yeah.
of like pushing like a sled, right?
Mhm.
And even what you're mentioning with like him and YA, like having guys that have a little bit more length, and YA's arms are just unbelievably long, but being able to keep blockers off guys like Queen and Wilson, who are more like small, kind of run and hit guys at the second level, should
Mhm.
definitely pay dividends. And I'm excited to see what those guys are going to bring to the table, especially as we get to camp. But I mean, I don't know that there's anyone that I'm more excited about than Caleb Johnson. So I want to talk
Mm.
about their next pick. Didn't have a second rounder, but with Caleb, definitely someone that I was kind of banging the table for the Steelers to get all throughout the
You were.
draft
I remember you were
process.
leading the charge early about Caleb Johnson.
Yeah, the scheme fit, and just I knew that Arthur Smith was definitely going to be have Caleb on his radar. But what have you seen so far from him, from Caleb, just so far, and kind of the relationship maybe between him and Jalen that they formed?
So it's funny. I talked to him Thursday, and I was trying to get a sense of, because it is tough. Like, he's a physical runner. He's
Hmm.
his best moments are going to come when the pads are on, and you can see not only how does he run through contact, but also how does he set up ways to avoid it, and how does he stack linemen. I think that's one of the more impressive things that he would do with his vision, is
Yep.
he could set up and say, like, hey, all right, this guy's getting to that level. I just have to beat that guy over there, and he'll figure out the best way to do that. I'm very eager to see him do that in the training camp and the preseason when the pads go on. But one thing I did ask him, like, so what do you do when you can't do that? And he's like, well, right now, biggest thing I am doing is I'm running into every defender in these practices. And he's like, not like running into them to run them over, but he's like, I want everyone to try to punch the ball out. And he says he's keeping the ball high and tight. And he's saying, I tell everyone, punch it out, see if you can get it out for me. And through 2 rookie camps practices and 6 OTAs practices, he has yet to let the ball hit the ground. So he's doing well there, and that's certainly a big part of it. For the Steelers, I think that was one of Najee Harris's better attributes, was he protected the football. That was something the Steelers
Hmm.
definitely felt in the 2018 season, and maybe even a little bit in the 2020 season, where just running backs, when they put the ball on the turf, and you want to be a team that can run the football, it sets you back a lot. So Caleb Johnson, at least that part he has down. I think the biggest thing that they're really working with him on to develop is his pass protection. You see Eddie Faulkner with him saying, like, I need you to explode with your hips through the contact, and he's giving him those types of drills, and I think he's taking it on well. I also think it helps that he has a guy like Jalen Warren ahead of him, who Jalen Warren, despite his size, is extremely good at pass protection
Right.
when he's back there. So he's learning tips from him, while Eddie Faulkner's being a really good position coach. I truly think Eddie Faulkner is one of the more underrated position coaches on this team, maybe in the NFL, because I think he does a great job. When I watch him go through the details, he's quick to call things out. He adjusts things. He makes sure he drills those fundamentals in, and it's why I think Najee Harris and Jalen Warren were both good pass protectors for the Steelers when it came to that kind of stuff. So if Caleb Johnson can learn from Faulkner and get to that level, it's only going to speed up the process of how much they trust him to be on the field as the regular number 1 guy. But certainly they're excited to have a Jalen Warren who's been in their system, won't have to adjust to anything. It's like, okay, Jalen, now's your time to kind of take the lead, even though you do know that your future is right behind you.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned just the reliability aspect with Harris, but just what do we talk about all the time? Like when these young guys come in as
Mhm.
running backs to the NFL, it's like, how are you going to get on the field and how do you stay on the field? And it really comes down to taking care of the football. If you put the ball on the ground, they're not going to want to trust you, right? And then also pass
Right.
protection. For most teams, the quarterback is going to be the most highly compensated player on the roster. You got to keep that guy upright. If they don't trust you to do that, you're not going to play, and that just is what it is. And it's something to keep in mind as we go through these draft evals. And with Johnson, it was really fascinating just because the way that the Iowa offense kind of operated. He only had 38 pass blocking reps last season. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
couple games for Jaylen Warren. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So it's completely different. And I'm just interested to see, like, you mentioned like him coaching him up on the technique, like bringing his hips, driving force through the ground.
Yeah.
But I'm also interested to see, and maybe you'll get the chance to like keep an eye on this next week too during minicamp. It's just his hands. It's one of the things, like, he wasn't targeted a lot because, again, Iowa just didn't throw the ball very much. Like, they were very limited in the passing game, which speaks to his success on the ground, right? That he was dealing with all those loaded boxes and everything that he was dealing with. But
Mhm.
just interested to see how he catches the football and how quickly they can get him up to speed. But yeah, I'm pretty bullish on Johnson. And kind of speaking of catching the football and like somebody that they're going to be relying on, I feel like pretty heavily offense, or hopefully so. It's going to be Roman Wilson. I know, like, coming out of camp
Mhm.
last year, seemed like even over the summer, a lot of guys like maybe not yourself, but I know, like, I was talking to like Alan Saunders and hearing some things from other people that were kind of watching him throughout early in the process. It was like it was taking him a little bit to kind of make that transition. And towards the end of the season, I started hearing like more encouraging things from a lot of people that were at practices and things like that after he finally got healthy. But what have you seen so far from Roman Wilson through OTAs?
I've seen a more polished guy as far as doing the basic things that they want a smaller, quicker, faster receiver to do to get open. Like, he's going into and out of his breaks low. He's doing those things that I think that he didn't have to do as much in college, because
Hmm.
oftentimes he could just line up, run a crossing pattern, and he beat most college defensive backs without having to do those things. But one thing Zach Azani is drilling into him, hey, you got to do these things to get through the press. You got to do these things when they're backing off you, and you know that they're setting you up for someone else to come in and help in a zone coverage. And I see a Roman Wilson that is much more in tune with what's being asked there, and that is helping him get into the rest of his play. Now, I still think he still has to put it all together as far as like, combining that with following through. And there's times where I think he loses his footing when he's trying to dig in certain parts. But I think that he has the mindset and like he understands what they're coaching him to do now. Whereas last year, I think that around this time he was kind of like, I'm getting there, I'm going to figure it out. I think this year it's more like, oh no, I know what's being asked of me. I understand it. I just have to put my feet to it and just keep repping it until it's just, muscle memory at that point that I am able to do that without thinking about it. And then, because that's the thing, that's like coaching and being an athlete, right? You
Yeah.
work so hard at this thing here and this thing here and this thing here, so that in 6 months time, a year's time, however long it takes, that becomes something that's so automatic that now I'm able to think about the next level. Now I'm able to think about what do I do to do at this stage, or think about how I fit into the schematics of an overall play more than just my own personal fundamentals. And I think Roman Wilson could be past that first stage that we're talking about very soon.
Yeah, I think sometimes, guys come in and I've kind of heard it described as like their head spinning, right? And I think that
Yes,
that probably was the case for Roman early on last year. And then the injuries kind of just, I mean, it almost like sucks the life out of you a little bit just because
it does.
I'm sure that he felt really frustrated. I know, like, when I was there at camp last year, he already had a boot on, so I didn't even really get to see him play. So I'm excited about, I think the thing I was most excited to hear, like, early on in the OTA process was like that quote where he was talking about a lot of things you were talking about, like understanding like how to get in and out of his breaks, like how to maintain speed, but also understand how to decelerate quicker and things like that. And like that's going to make the world of difference. Like if he is able to fine tune those details, it's going to be a big help for their offense, especially because kind of like what we said with Harmon, there is a lot of opportunity there for playing time. Right, like
Yeah.
the door is wide open. Especially, I'm assuming that the Steelers are going to continue to push for maybe another pass catcher into the equation. But I mean,
Hmm.
maybe like the best case scenario, right, is that that's not necessary. Like that we get through training camp and you just feel so confident about what he brings to the table. You're like, okay, like we feel like we can give this guy a lion's share of snaps. But speaking of kind of moving forward, when you look, for like, what are you looking forward to most about finding out about these Steelers when they take the field during training camp? Could again be a player, a unit, but like, what's the number one thing like you're excited to see early on once we get to Latrobe?
Well, it's two groups that have to prove themselves going to be clashing against each other, and that's the offensive and defensive lines.
Right.
Because the not only do the Steelers need the defensive line to be better against the run this year, they need the offensive line to be good at blocking the run this year. And it's going to be interesting to see, because we're going to when we get those one-on-one reps and those team reps, we finally start seeing these guys with the pads on after the first week of training camp. We're gonna start to pass judgment on, okay, Zach Frazier's doing this, okay, Derek Harmon's doing that, okay, Broderick Jones is doing this, and then this guy's doing. We're gonna have all these judgments, but it's still gonna be like, okay, but this, is one side winning because the other side's bad, or are these guys both kind of equally mediocre, or are they both really really good? We won't know until they start playing other teams, and there are some joint practices. I know they have at least one with the Buccaneers towards the end of their preseason, or their end of training camp, so that they can get ready for the preseason game against the Buccaneers. But I think that's going to be the biggest thing that I'm going to want to see. How does this group develop? Because I'll tell you what, another player that stood out to me is Broderick Jones. And again, you can't see him do all the things with no pads on. He's got to be physical, but he looks so much more comfortable at being a left tackle than he did being a right tackle. And I'm not even sure it's just the flip. I think that his combination of what he's worked on in the offseason, him losing 20 pounds so that he could kind of just be like I said with Stephon Tuitt, Broderick Jones's plan is like, hey, last year I came in around 325 or so, and then I put on some weight after that. I want to come in lighter. So he came in at 305, and his plan is like, I'm probably going to end up having to put on 10 pounds throughout the rest of the season. He's like, but that I can live with. And for him, I think he wants to be quicker. He wants to be faster. He wants to get into his drop quicker so that he can get in place and handle speed rushers better than what he had been doing, because I think that was one of his biggest weaknesses, were guys that could just get past him really quickly. And so I think, again, kind of like Roman Wilson, I think Broderick Jones is started to see okay, this is what I have to work on. This is what I have to be better at. And if that is something that he actually puts on tape this year, that'll go a very long way, because they need him and Troy Fautanu to live up to being first-round picks sooner rather than later. Fautanu, it's tough to tell as well, because it's his first thing. I think Fautanu is going to be a great fit for what the Steelers are trying to do at right tackle. I think Zach Frazier is in a really good place. I think Mason McCormick can take a step up. But again, football in shorts, I can't really tell these things until they hit, and then they keep hitting, because it's not just the first impression of how physical these guys are. A big part of being a good and great offensive line is being able to hit and keep hitting and win that war of attrition and be the group that wears you down rather than gets worn down. And I think that's what happened to this unit last year. They got worn down. You saw like all those mental mistakes. Like the mental mistakes were there early, but they compounded upon themselves late in the season. You saw the plays like where Dan Moore and Broderick Jones would run into each other. That stuff happens when you're mentally fatigued because you're physically fatigued. Yeah, it was bad. I mean, you saw I was just like, oh man. But
got guys pulling the same direction.
Exactly. Like you can't have that kind of stuff. But that stuff happens when you're starting to get wore down and you're not able to focus. And I think that's what this group has to show this year is they're not going to be the ones that get wore down. You're going to be that. And I think that was something the 2010s Steelers offensive line did very well. How many times were they able to be in the fourth quarter and be like, all right, we're not tired. Are you? And if the Steelers offensive line this year can be that, that's going to go a long way. But again, you can't really tell that during training camp. But, Mike Tomlin, one thing that they did last year, they practiced early in the morning so that they weren't in the most extreme of heat. They're not doing that this year.
Back to afternoons,
which personally I love. I prefer the afternoon practices, even though it does mean I am going to be scorching hot a lot more days. But I think that's just the way Mike Tomlin, he wants training camp to be an endurance tester on top of everything else. He wants to see how miserable you get in the heat, in the worst of conditions. How do you continue for a 3-week period? And if he pulls that out of you, if he finds that in you, then that makes you more ready for when you get into the tougher parts of the season, so that you're not fatiguing and making more mental mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line is a really good shout. Just because, for one, I'm happy to hear that about Broderick. I'm very excited about hopefully that stuff does translate because the film, is the film, and it's a pretty tough watch. I've been going back and watching a lot of his stuff just for a separate video that I'm doing. But I will say this, like to offer some, I think what you're saying is definitely going to be kind of music to the ears of Steelers fans. But I will also say this: I tweeted out a clip of Troy Fautanu the other day. I think it was 2 days ago, and one of the Steelers players texted me and said he's been an effing stud in OTAs. So I was really jacked up to hear that because Fautanu was a guy that I was really high on through the draft process. I was really surprised that he fell all the way to the Steelers. Of course, the injury concerns kind of do muddy that picture a little bit, but I'm really optimistic about the type of player that he could be for this offense. I think he's got a really high ceiling, and he's probably the guy that I'm most looking forward to seeing in Latrobe. I think it's really between him and Caleb for me. So
yeah.
But yeah, I guess now just to kind of close this thing out, man. The quarterback situation is at least solved, or I'll say solved in quotations. We'll see how it ultimately plays out when the games start in the regular season. But we know who the quarterback's going to be this fall, right? With Aaron Rodgers in the fold, we'll see what that experiment looks like, how they mesh the offense now that they've got him into the equation. But what's your biggest concern as it relates solely to the 2025 version of the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Biggest concern is can they take the steps forward with the nucleus that they're expecting to be the next flag holders or flag bearers for the Pittsburgh Steelers? I have full confidence that TJ Watt's going to sign his extension, that he'll be fine. I think Cam Hayward will still be fine. I think, the guys who have been the torch bearers that have kind of carried the Steelers through the toughest moments in the past 5 years or so, they're going to be fine. And I think that what the Steelers really need is they need this next group to emerge very, very soon, because and it doesn't have to just be one specific group, but like I've been saying it on Locked On Steelers a lot. The class of Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton, that crew needs to emerge as like the up and coming Steelers that are going to be the guys that the team can depend upon to win important matchups more and more. If they can get that from this crew, and you start to see some of these other young guys step into it, Zach Frazier, Fautanu, that could be the biggest thing that they achieve this year. If they do not find that, that will be the thing that may mess up the chance at setting up the window that I foresee. Because the 2025 Steelers, I do not see as Super Bowl contenders. I know some people believe that Aaron Rodgers, has that kind of magic still in him. I think Aaron Rodgers, what he will do is, if the Steelers roster outside of the quarterback position would win you 8 or 9 games, I think Aaron Rodgers could help you win 10 or 11 games. I think that's where he can avoid. He will raise your floor to the point where he won't make some of the bad decisions or miss some of the throws that Mason Rudolph would make if he was just your guy, right? I don't think he's going to just have you going back and forth with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, in a big shootout. But I do think that he'll help you avoid those. If he does help, if he is a cog in the machine that they're putting together, right? He won't be the thing that makes the machine work, but he could be the thing that gets out of the way, as the quarterback has been in the way for some years now between Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and everyone else in that path. But if he gets out of the way and that part is just plays to the system, and the offensive line becomes, maybe not a top 10 unit, but just outside the top 10, maybe like the 13th best offensive line. If the secondary doesn't give up those big plays, and you see Joey Porter Jr. emerging into, okay, he's ready to take on whichever receiver you line up in front of him. Maybe Corey Trice develops as the guy behind that'll take Darius Slay's spot next season. If Peyton Wilson and Patrick Queen and Cole Holcomb become a really good trio at linebacker. If if Jack Sawyer and Herbig are good 1 and 2 replacements behind Watt and Highsmith, and the defensive line's much better, you could have the chance to set up a very 2004-ish like situation, where even though the 2003 Steelers were 6-10, they had an offensive line, they had a run game, they had playmakers on offense, they had a defensive nucleus that they could believe in. They just needed a quarterback, and lo and behold, they got Ben Roethlisberger. And if you can even just do that part of the 2025 season, and you do end up landing your quarterback, the quarterback that's your next guy in 2026, which all indications point to, they are hoping that that's going to be the class that they get their guy in, you could have a 2004-like situation where, let's say Lenore Sellers, whoever your quarterback, that you think is the guy next year comes in, and you're saying, hey, young buck, we believe that you're the guy, but you do not have to carry this by yourself. We have a whole system that's going to make things a lot easier for you. Just make the plays when we're telling you to, and then you'll grow into your own in the NFL. That is what I think the Steelers are setting up. And if the Steelers get that from that next nucleus to start to emerge, it will go a long way to saying this season was success because it set up the new window for the Steelers to be real contenders again in the NFL.
Right. I mean, it's definitely, a tight window to thread just because, like it's one of those things where you're trying to get some of these guys to step up to kind of offset just the atrophy from some of the older players. Like how many years in a row now have we walked into the season and said like, you can pretty much set your clock to TJ Watt. You can set your clock to Cam Hayward, guys like that. But those guys are getting a little bit older. So like you said, I think it's a good point about figuring out who are going to be the next like foundational building blocks for this team moving forward. And then I do agree with you. And I think that is like, that's the realist in me, is saying that this can still be a successful season, even if it does amount to the exact same record or the same outcome as last year. If you do exit the season feeling better about the rest of the roster as it pertains to the ecosystem that you're dropping a young quarterback into for 2026, right? And I think the biggest thing is the offensive line. For like my Steelers mailbag, somebody asked a great question. It was like, what's the one thing that you want to see them do this year? And it's like, run the football. Like, please run the football
1,000%.
efficiently. Like, how many years in a row have we been begging for that to be the case? They finished in the bottom third of the league in rushing EPA per play, rushing success rate, things like that. The Steelers were 31st in yards or percentage of their runs that they were hit in the backfield or at the line of scrimmage, and like 48%. It just can't be the case. Like this offense isn't going to be that successful this season with Rodgers or moving forward if that doesn't get corrected. Because if they can really rely on, especially with all the investments, you talk about taking back-to-back first-round tackles. I already think that Zach Frazier is like on like a Pro Bowl, like top 5 at his position type of trajectory. So, I think that there's definitely still an outcome here. And I say that to people because I know there are some people that are just like kind of maybe pessimistic about the Rodgers angle or whatever, but I do think that there is still ways for this season to be a success, even if the record doesn't necessarily look the way that maybe the optimists view this team. But as always, I really appreciate the conversation, man. I really appreciate you jumping on. It's awesome talking ball with you. Please tell the people where they can find you. I'm sure most of my subs are definitely already over there, but if you can, just tell them where to find you and what you're working on.
Absolutely. My name is Christopher Carter. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. You can find me on the North Shore Drive podcast there every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But as always, you can also find me on the Locked On Steelers podcast, same way you find Derek, on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy his work. And hey, subscribe to this channel because he does a great job. And if you want to hear more of what I have to say, subscribe to my channel. We can all eat, and we all do eat here because I think Steelers fans are the greatest fans in sports because they take in so much and they want to hear real coverage, real analysis like we're able to put here. Derek, thanks so much for having me, man. It's always great to talk ball with you.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. It's always good getting together. As for my subs, I appreciate you guys' continued support throughout the off season. I'm very blessed to be in this position. I have great guests on like Chris, and I am on vacation next week, so I'm planning on hopefully having something for you guys on the channel, scheduled, but we'll see how kind of time allots. But as always, I appreciate you guys just on your way out. If you could, like Chris said, like that video, and I will check you guys very soon. Peace and love.